Let me start off with this. I know you should never get into a car with a stranger, and yes, it was dumb of me to do so. But when you're young and impressionable like I was, the threat almost seemed non-existent at the time. I was about 16 and wasn't really a good-looking girl. Never ever got hit on by boys, and my chubby features did not really help my cause. I also seemed to make friends with older people since a lot of my peers were into styles, music, and recreational activities that I just did not find interesting. So I figured the chances that I were to become a victim of anything predatory was just so far from my mind, I always felt safe. So I was alone downtown like I have been many times before when this man in his 60s asked me about the Beatles shirt I was wearing.
Do you like the band, or do you think the shirt just looked cool?
I just laughed and explained that they were my favorite band. He and I talked for a minute about the band, and then he starts to explain to me that he is just visiting for a couple of days, and asked if I knew where to get a good cup of coffee. Being a coffee junkie myself, I knew a place only a few blocks from where we were at, and told him I would take him there. When we got there, he offered to buy me a cup and wanted me to just talk to him for a while, since I seemed like such a nice girl. He thought it was refreshing to see someone as young as me have such an interesting outlook on everything. I didn't find any harm in the invitation, and I agreed to stay and share a cup of coffee with him. After I'd had my first cup of coffee, I noticed it was getting pretty late. I had a curfew of 11 p.m. that night, and the buses stopped running to the area around my home around 10 p.m. I told him that I had to go home now if I wanted to make it home on time. At this time it was about 7:30 p.m., but I wanted to stop by a friend's house before I went home. He told me he could give me a ride home so that we could have another cup of coffee. I wasn't too keen on taking him up on his offer, but at the time, he seemed so harmless. I decided that I would go see my friend tomorrow and just visit with the old man. I should also add that I told him my curfew was 9 o'clock. I said that so that I could hang out with my friend without him feeling like I was ditching him. I stayed to chat a little longer, and then he said he would drive me home. At this point, I almost felt obligated. If I told him I would catch the bus, he would know that I would either be late for my curfew or that I was lying to cut the visit short.
My car is parked only a block from here. I'll get you home in no time,
he said, smiling. I was a little creeped by this point, but he still just seemed like a friendly old man. We got into his car and I started to give him directions, with the intentions of having him drop me off a few blocks from my real home, so he didn't actually know where I lived. I told him to turn right, and then he didn't. This isn't the way, I said, trying not to sound scared.
Oh, I'm sorry,
he said in a sweet old man's voice.
Can you still get me to your house from here?
I was trying to keep cool. Yeah, in 2 blocks at the next stoplight, turn left, making sure there was no way he could miss it this time. Before we got to the next stoplight, he got onto the merge ramp to get onto the freeway. By this time I was freaking out. Where are you taking me? His voice went from sweet old man to this strong, stern voice.
Relax, baby. I thought we could stop by my hotel first. I have something I want to give you.
I tried to be cool while planning my next move. Where's your hotel? He smiled.
It's only a few miles from here. I'll get you home before curfew.
He kept driving and driving, saying it was just a little further. I realized we were almost to the next big town, which was about 45 minutes from where we got on the freeway. I was shaking, trying to stay cool, as if I had no idea that this was a bad situation. He stopped at this shabby motel and directed me into his room. He had the door open and was pushing me in before I could even start running. We got inside and he closed the door.
I just want some company. I'll get you some dinner and we'll go to a movie or something. Here, baby, have a drink,
he said in his new stern voice. I declined to the drink when he got nose to nose with me and told me that I just needed to relax and have a drink. I took the drink and I pretended to drink it. Then he sat on the bed and stared at me like he was waiting. I looked at the clock and it was nearly 9:30. I need to go home now, I demanded, looking at him straight in the eyes. He looked irritated, but seemed as if he was trying to keep his cool.
I'll call you a cab, if you do one thing for me.
I glared at him. I knew what he was implying. I have a boyfriend. I told you that already, trying not to add to the fact that he was older than my grandpa to elevate the situation.
Oh, come on, baby. He doesn't have to know.
You need to call that cab now, I said, surprisingly steady. He rolled his eyes and took the motel phone. He opened the phone book and started to dial in a number. He waited for a second and said,
Hello, I need a cab too.
And then just said some address.
How much will it cost to take it to?
And then said the name of the city.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
And he hung up.
cab will be here in 20 minutes.
My face felt cold. I could hear the other side of the line saying, At this point I was in a mixture between fight and flight, and I call him out on it. You must think you're pretty smart. I could hear the call. I'm going. I started to walk to the door and he got in between me and the door. Again, looking straight into his eyes, I said, Move. He smiled sheepishly and said,
Okay, I have to pay to make a call on these phones. I'll give you a ride to the next store and you can call a cab from there. Okay?
He digs into his pockets and he hands me $60.
This should cover the cost of the cab. Just take it and I'll give you a ride.
He pushed the money into my hand and put me into his car pretty violently. Since this motel was at the end of town, it would be about 10 minutes before he could drop me off at a store. As he started the car, I made a very close observation of his movements, ready to clock him in the face if he moved wrong. I noticed him crouching down as he was driving, like he was scratching his ankle or something. Thankfully, after having a night of poor thinking, I thought, maybe he isn't scratching, but he's looking for something under the seat. I decided to check under my seat to see if there was anything I could use as a weapon, just in case he found what he was looking for. I didn't have to rummage very far before I found a crowbar. I grabbed it hard and it clinked on the seat as I pulled it out. The noise was loud enough for the old man to hear it. I held it in my lap and let it out for him to see it. At this time I was ready to go psycho and scare the living crap out of him. Then he did a U-turn and started heading back to the lights of the town. I realized I had gotten control of the situation he had put me in. It was then that I glanced into the back seat for a second, and I caught a glimpse of plastic. Lots of plastic, glinting in the back seat when we drove under a street lamp. I remember swallowing hard and thinking, I need to make him scared of me. I looked at him, trying to give him the scariest smile I could muster in fear, and said, Looks like it wasn't only my plan that didn't go through tonight. Oh, you can drop me off here, baby. He braked so hard I almost dropped the crowbar. We were in front of a well-lit gas station. I got out, still holding the crowbar, and I waved goodbye with it in my hand, still trying to keep my creepy smile. He sped off and I ran into the gas station, feeling numb and sick at the same time. I didn't even realize I still had the crowbar in hand. I startled the shopkeeper but quickly dropped it and told her what had happened. As soon as I sat down, I realized I still had the money the old man gave me. I thought about it and was pretty sure he wasn't planning on letting me keep it. Then the whole night and what could have happened rushed through my head, and I started to shake and cry. The shopkeeper's shift was pretty much over and she offered to drive me all the way home. I ended up giving her the $60 and I somehow made it home before 11. I just went straight to my room and hid for the rest of the weekend. I'm pretty proud of myself for managing to escape and making it seem that I wasn't scared and somehow getting the upper hand. But I shouldn't have gotten into that car with him in the first place. This story happened to me and a group of my friends 4 years ago. We were all around 18 and 19 years of age and we were in that rebellious stage of our lives. So one of my friend's parents were traveling for the weekend and he had the entire house for himself. So we all got super excited and decided to grab alcohol and party all night. First night of the weekend, all of us met at my friend's place. There was around 6 of us. And let me tell you, this friend of mine is loaded, so his family lived in this beautiful 2-story house which was in a gated community, secure and very safe. The night began with a bang. Lots of drinking, dancing, running around and just being silly. But that's when the weird stuff began to happen. It was around 2 a.m. and we heard a knock on the door. At first we freaked out assuming his parents were back, so we quickly threw away all the alcohol bottles and opened the main door expecting to see them standing there. Except, there was no one at the door. We thought that maybe it was just our imaginations as we were all a little bit tipsy by then, so we went back to our dancing and after a few minutes, we hear loud bangs on the door. This time, it felt like not one person was knocking, but 2 people. We ran to the door and quickly opened it and saw that there was no one at the entrance yet again. We thought someone was playing a stupid prank on us and we decided to check out the surroundings for ourselves. We were oddly disappointed to find no one and no signs of a break-in. Still a little shaken up by the knocks, we decided to calm down and play video games. After a couple of minutes though, the knocks started again. At this point we were beginning to get a little annoyed. That's when one of us yelled, "Who the hell is it?" We got a response from the voice of a middle-aged woman. "Open the door." We were all shocked and asked, "What do you want?" No response. Everything went calm for a few minutes when, once again, the knocks began. Followed again by the voice of the older lady. "Open the door." We were scared but tried to stay calm. We didn't respond and the knocks began yet again. That's when the voice of the lady got aggressive. She started to scream,
"Open the door."
One of our friends got curious and decided to open the door even though we begged him not to. But once again, no one was found. We were all surprised. How could an older lady run away like that within a fraction of a second? We went back into the house and immediately after we closed the door, the knocks began again. At this point, we realized that it wasn't human, and it definitely wasn't normal. One of my friends began asking what her problem was and told her to leave us alone. This must have ticked her off because the knocks became more violent and her voice became more aggressive. It was scary as hell, but my stupid friend kept abusing this woman, arrogantly calling her names. While all this was still going on, we decided to open the door and deal with the lady. We opened the door while the knocking was still going on, but again, there was no one at the door and everything was silent. By now, 3 hours had passed and it was 5 a.m. The sunlight was rising outside. We wanted to know what was going on, so we decided to leave the door open, and we sat in front of it, but no more knocks, and no lady. But now we were all terrified and we were planning on leaving. We thought we had enough of this for the night and left. My friend came to my place to stay for the remainder of the weekend as he was too scared to sleep in his house alone after all this creepy stuff. His parents came back after the weekend and we decided not to tell him what had happened, and to our surprise, he never experienced anything like that ever again in that house. It was like something came to visit us and ruin our night. It could be good, bad, or evil. I guess we'll never know. But never have I ever spent a night in that house since. For context, I'm a female, and I was 14 years old at the time of this event. It was December and my parents were driving me and my brother down to my aunt's to drop off Christmas presents. When we arrived, my parents decided to stay and chat for a bit, and naturally I got bored, so I offered to take their dog Dan for a walk. He's a golden retriever, so a pretty laid-back dog and not very intimidating at all. They agreed, but warned me to stay on the main street and not to go down any poorly lit roads, since my aunt lives in quite a rough area of England. I just mumbled something and I walked out of the door thinking that I was able to protect myself. Dan and I walked for about 5 minutes or so before I got bored and was curious to check out a smaller street on the left. This road seemed slightly eerie and the houses were a lot more beat up than the ones on the main street, but I ignored this and I continued to walk to the end of the road. As I turned the corner, I noticed a figure dressed head to toe in black and holding what seemed to be a crowbar in his hand. I think he was attempting to break into a car, but I couldn't quite tell as the only light was a dim, flickering orange light coming from the street lamps. I stood there and stared at him blankly, in awe and shock, before coming to my senses and swiftly making my escape. He hadn't noticed me, but I was planning to walk back to my aunt's house to call the police, but I realized that I wanted to be sure that he was actually breaking into the car before causing any commotion. I turned left at the main street and walked down an alley which led to the same road. There was a car parked up against the pavement, and I used that to my advantage by crouching behind it and peering my head around the side. I squinted trying to get a better view, but Dan went crazy and then began barking and growling. I hissed at him to stop, but it was too late. The man was already turned in our direction. I couldn't make out his face because he was wearing a hood, but I knew that he must have seen me as he began to slowly walk towards the car with inconsistent steps. My brain told me that I needed to get out of there, so I yanked Dan by the collar and we bolted down the nearest alley. I could hear him closing in, but I kept running, taking random turns and trying to lose him. But it didn't work. At one point, he managed to get right behind me and grab my leg, but I pulled it away, causing him to trip. I took that as my chance and ran left and right down any road that I came across. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care as long as I got away from him. He was still behind me, but not as close anymore, so I turned down a road and crouched in a neighbor's bush before holding my breath. The man ran straight past me and down another street. He didn't come back. I was hiding in that bush for a good 20 minutes, sobbing into Dan's fur before I had the courage to come out. I managed to find my way back and we called the police, but I don't think the man was found since I couldn't make out his features. To this day, I still hate to think what would have happened if he had caught me.